Hello, and welcome to the commentated version of this TAS. Unfortunately, this TAS is so information dense that I won't have time to give explanations for basic moves or mechanics. Captions are provided, sorry to those who have no idea what I'm talking about. Right off the bat here, I do a turnaround wall pounce. All variants of Rivulet's wall pounces get ridiculous height, making them the lifeblood of his vertical movement. The jump I did off of that platform was spaced very specifically to line up this corner wall pounce. It's not only vertically precise, but has a tick-perfect jump input. Buffering it just does a normal jump instead, for some reason. Speaking of for some reason, this wall pounce is the first of many jumps that I still don't fully understand. Creature dens normally stop the vast majority of movements dead in their tracks, but for whatever reason I can still wall pounce directly off of that one as long as I press jump a tick early. Must be some nonsense with my exact height. This room has a lot of tunnels, which are very frustrating to TAS through. They're extremely slow, take a long time to optimize, and usually force you to a very specific position whether you want to be there or not. That being said, they do have one major boon for Rivulet especially, which you'll see here in a second. So, it turns out, Rivulet can get an obscene 14 jump storage, or JS, from tunnels. For perspective, normal jump storage is 6, and some other setups can give 8. Higher values are also exponentially more powerful, which is how that pipe boost just launched me up an entire screen. 14JS usually takes a fair bit of time to set up though. It's only faster there because it skips a particularly long and problematic tunnel. Normally, trying to slide off of a ledge will immediately cancel it, but Rivulet slides in particular can slide through one-tile drops, if they're started close enough to that one-tile drop. This is another turnaround wall bounce, which normally leverages the speed boost from a turnaround animation. Amusingly though, Rivulet's regular run is so stupidly fast that no turnaround is actually required. I'm carrying run storage into this room, which causes a strange problem. The wall bounce I'm about to line up requires turn storage, for some reason, but my initial run storage will trigger a turn too early. To counter this, I start and immediately cancel a turn as soon as I touch the ground, letting me build a second run in just barely enough time for a second turn. I hit this wall as low as possible to hit the ceiling geometry further to the left, giving a better bounce that lets me land faster. In this brief moment, I start turn storage, store 6 jump, let a bit of the jump storage decay, then I pounce at a very specific height to line up this wall pounce chain. The turn storage gets carried all the way up to this pole, where it's used for a pole momentum coyote pole backflip, giving the perfect height for a miraculously clean room exit. I wish I had time to explain what any of that meant. I haven't had a chance to mention it until now, but cleanly exiting upwards pipes and tunnels requires a ton of micromanagement, and almost every single one needs a different solution. There's an extremely thin line between too little speed to exit standing and too much speed to land quickly. Annoyingly, the only good way to find that line is brute force, making tunnels even more time-consuming to optimize. Despite how slow moving through tunnels is, taking this next one still appears to be the fastest way through the room. The left side of the room has a lot of theoretically faster routes that almost work, but they all either literally run into problematic terrain, or fail to run into anything at all and fall back down. A wall pounce gets up to the topmost platform faster, but it gives too much height without any way to slow down. Oddly, there's a very short window where jumping out of a ledge pull-up gives slightly more speed than running. I do that and crouch midair to neatly line up a 14JS setup for the next room. A 14JS pipe boost gives the perfect amount of height to snipe this tunnel, skipping most of the room. There's a variety of other ways to reach that tunnel, but it's hard to outspeed a direct line between point A and point B. A lot of effort goes into controlling these parenthesis-shaped slide wall pounces. Their height and angle can be adjusted in a number of different ways, but they end up pretty restrictive since there's no way to undo changes in momentum. Rivulet has 2 main options for horizontal speed, slide pounces and I pounces, short for instant pounces. I pounces are a bugged version of a slide pounce that can be started instantly, but they end up being slightly slower in a straight line due to needing to land more frequently. A lot of stuff happens here at once. I start with an I spin, which is the I pounce version of slide backflips, to give me turn storage along with some height. I then grab and jump off of the side of a vertical pole, which lets me keep turn storage. Next come 2 pole hops followed by grabbing and standing up on a horizontal pole, and finally a pole backflip. That backflip gives barely enough height to grab and jump off of the top left pole without a slow pull-up animation. This all skips a significant part of the room. Sections like this are weird to optimize because the scattered terrain pretty much forces you to make a minimum number of jumps, even if the minimum is more than you'd otherwise need. The limiting factor then is trying to reach the ground as fast as possible, meaning it can be faster overall to actively slow down to avoid overshooting a platform. There's a lot of distance manipulation going on here that's basically unnoticeable without carefully watching the input display. It looks like I just barely make this jump, but I actually slowed down to land there intentionally. That slope can give me 8JS, which I then pair with a slide pounce to fly completely over a large section of very problematic terrain. Normally the start of a slide will reset your jump storage, but something about Rivulet's slide in particular seems to keep you grounded better, as long as you don't start it in a particularly strange way. Don't feel bad if you've ever struggled to get through this room quickly. I had to brute force pretty much the entire right half, and it's easily the slowest segment in the TAS. Nothing in the room lines up at all, to the point where the fastest way to get to the exit involves briefly running away from it. Speaking of, the exit used here and in a couple other rooms is done by simply sliding and holding down as you're about to cross over the pipe. This redirects most of your forwards momentum into downwards momentum, making it one of the fastest ways to enter a pipe, period. It can be done as any character, though of course it's easiest with Rivulet, as most things are. I cannot fathom the reasoning behind this, but exiting downwards pipe transitions gives a completely random amount of horizontal velocity. Random is of course a death sentence for a pre-programmed sequence of inputs, and Rainworld's TAS tools currently have no way of predicting or manipulating RNG. Every time I exit a downwards pipe, I have to teleport myself to one of the possible outcomes to avoid desyncing constantly. Technically this is cheating, but it's either that or a task that doesn't work 99% of the time. Theoretically it's faster to never drop down to this lower platform, but as far as I can tell it's unavoidable. Getting on top of that box in the pole would cut out some climbing, but I couldn't find a way to land there from the right at all, let alone in a way that's faster. You may have noticed by now that my pole climbing looks weird. This is a technique called Fast Pole Climb, or FPC. It works by boosting upwards on a vertical pole, jumping off of the pole to cancel the boosts and lag, then immediately re-grabbing the pole to boost again. Ironically enough, Rivulet moves so quickly on poles already that for humans, FPC is usually slower. It's also very risky as each re-grab is tick perfect, even top speedrunners typically avoid it. Tick perfect is no problem for a TAS of course, and it ends up being a massive 44% faster than climbing normally. I don't know why, but sometimes Rivulet randomly throws his arms into the air on this landing. I'm glad the final recording included it, it looks pretty funny. I actually found a vastly faster way to start this turnaround wall pounce using a very janky slide. Unfortunately, it's so fast that it simultaneously counts as a wall pounce and a too early slide pounce failure, which locks me into slowdown for a full second, ruining the pipe entry. Occasionally, I'll have to task the same section twice to precisely compare different approaches' speed. This room, though, had 5 promising routes, 3 of which were in such a tight race that I needed to complete the room as all of them to get a definitive measure. The fastest route ended up being a slide stumble, but a pipe-boosted wall pounce is only 4 ticks slower, or 1/10 of a second. This room has the first of 4 shortcuts that the TAS will take. Shortcuts are quite slow compared to Rivulet's movement speed, so they're only faster if they skip something else that would take even more time. In this case, that something else is basically the entire room, which itself includes more shortcuts. Really low ceilings like this are both a blessing and a curse. On one hand, pretty much all movements hit the ceiling and slow down, but on the other hand, running into the ceiling resets you to a crouched animation state, which lets you stand back up and start another move way faster. Speaking of animation states, they're very important in this room in particular. The only good way to clear some of these gaps is using a whiplash wall climb, though Rivulet's version is so different it can hardly be called a wall climb anymore. The problem is that pounces and whiplashes put you into animation states called rocket jump and flip respectively, which severely or completely limit air control. You're locked into those animations until you touch some form of terrain, and the arc that a whiplash wall climb gives here takes a very long time to land. Luckily, for reasons beyond my comprehension, there's an extremely thin line between correct and incorrect spacing that gives a whiplash wall climb's arc, but doesn't put you into flip. This unlocks air control and lets me land standing up, saving almost a full second both times it's used. I also started both whiplash wall climbs as low on the wall as possible, to minimize the time spent waiting to land. This room is horrible to work with, both because there's lots of suspended geometry in the way of big jumps, and because the only good surfaces are extremely uneven. Rivulet's roll makes its first and only appearance here. It's strangely slow compared to all of his other options, but it does let you cleanly make it over certain bumps in geometry. A tech called Fast Roll both speeds up the roll itself, and coincidentally ends here with Rivulet almost perfectly vertical, cutting down on some end lag. This pipe boost is actually jump stored. It slows my fall slightly, letting me grab the pole quite a bit higher up, saving 4 ticks. I'm sure this upcoming pipe exit looks precise, but it's probably even more precise than what you're thinking. 9 out of 10 lineups visually indistinguishable from this one clip the ground next to the pipe and give Rivulet quite the concussion. It's a practical miracle that a lineup is even possible with that much horizontal velocity. There's a bit of downtime here, so I'll explain a few things I haven't had a chance to mention yet. Landing in certain ways causes Slugcat to subtly bounce up and down briefly. This switches between being considered grounded and airborne, which disrupts almost all movement techs. It can easily last over a quarter second, so lots of steps are taken throughout the TAS to try and minimize it as much as possible. While Rivulet's slide pounces are faster than his I-pounces often end up being better in sparse or rough terrain since they require so little space. Sometimes though, their shorter distance just lines up better. Slide pounces land directly on the debris in the previous room, for instance. Bumping into this overhang is a blessing, but it's ever so close to being a curse. As is, I can, or am forced to, bump into it to slow way down and get back to the ground faster. But if Rivulet's corner wall pounce were a hair lower, the overhang would block all variations of wall pounce and force me to take a completely different approach. The next best solution would probably be a backflip pull hop, which by my estimation would lose about half a second. This upcoming geometry is extremely uneven and would be a nightmare to optimize, if I couldn't skip it entirely with an I-pounce. It doesn't give the cleanest tunnel entry ever, but it works and I couldn't find a better way. There's actually 2 separate ledge pull-up animations. If you're high up enough, you get a slightly faster version that can be further expedited by tapping jump or holding up, which ends with you standing. Even ending in a stand on its own is significantly faster, so that second version is used wherever possible. Yet another thing I've yet to mention. Rivulet's regular airspeed is fast enough to trigger wall pounces on its own as long as you're crouched midair. It behaves very similarly to a tech called item wall pounce, but Rivulet can do it without items. An itemless wall pounce, if you will. In order here, I do a 14JS pipe boost, 2 pull hops, a wall jump, another pull hop despite being nowhere near the pole, a rightwards run for run storage, a leftwards I-pounce gaining turn storage, and finally a pull backflip. Quite literally jumping straight into such a dense section was a breath of fresh air after spamming I-pounces for so long in underhang. This slide wall pounce is yet another tick-perfect lineup. The first tick that reaches the wall is the very last tick where a slide pounce is possible. For a bit of perspective on how long certain optimizations can take, this one singular 14JS setup took over an hour of educated brute force. I even found a faster way to do it, but it triggers slowdown and kills the pipe boost. Running into the ceiling there sort of bounces Rivulet downwards for a faster landing. It's a bit hard to see, but I also hit the ceiling here, which angles me further downwards for a surprisingly clean pipe entry. It's possible to land the backflip further to the right, but that starts the I-pounce lower, which ironically enough leaves me too high to enter the pipe since I no longer hit the ceiling. Fun fact, bat flies can actually push you around, even if only slightly. I learned this because these swarm rooms will frequently desync the TAS if I don't properly remove the bats first. Rivulet's pull hops are far more lenient in general, but they can actually be done in any aerial animation. Funnily enough, pull hopping in the rocket jump animation spawns wall pounce particles in front of you, likely assuming one occurred. Landing on slopes in certain ways puts you into a stable stand almost instantly. It's probably the best way to exit rocket jump. There's a nearly imperceivable pull hop here, which gives a bit more height, triggering a ledge wall pounce instead of a normal wall pounce. Ledge wall pounces send you further and don't lock you into rocket jump. So, to very quickly sum up a lengthy rant, I spent the better part of a day trying to avoid this tunnel by going around the left side of the jutout. This could easily save multiple seconds, but an absolutely perfect corner wall pounce up there falls an agonizing 2% short. Naturally, if the floor layout were different in almost any way, it'd be easy. This rather unique section uses a janky coyote eye pounce, leading into a first possible tick roll pounce, followed immediately by a wall pounce. The pull hop there is also tick perfect. Any earlier hits the ceiling, and any later overshoots the next wall pounce. The clean landing on the slope is also tick perfect, though quite frankly I'm clueless as to why. Certain horizontal pipe exits behave very strangely in regards to your animation state. The exit to this room in particular almost refuses to put you into corridor climb, which is required to get 14JS. It took a fair bit of time and brute forcing to find a 14JS setup here that wasn't abysmally slow. I pipe boost off of this exit as late as possible, because the tunnel is the perfectly wrong length and I'd get stuck in slowdown on the very tick I need to boost upwards. Speaking of that boost, using anywhere near the full 14JS runs into the ceiling, so I need to cut the jump way early. This next wall pounce is super precise. In addition to strict height requirements, it needs Rivulet's head to be at the correct angle. This weird motion in the pull ladder is done by very rapidly and precisely switching between wall jumps and wall pounces. Grabbing the final pull and releasing it in a highly specific way also cancels the velocity almost perfectly, letting me immediately switch to a slide wall pounce. In trying to optimize that last shortcut exit, I accidentally found a janky way to wall bounce straight out of it. Unfortunately, it's entirely unhelpful for this TAS, and as it's both Rivulet and geometry specific, it's rather useless just in general. This next 14JS setup is actually completely different from the previous one, since I need to iPounce out of it instead of den boosting. For a quick explanation of how these setups actually work, I'm exiting the tunnel the shortcut is attached to, moving to the side a little so I don't fall back into it, then crawling back into the tunnel, pressing jump on the exact tick that I enter the corridor climb animation. In this case, I then need to exit the tunnel using a crawl so I'm never considered airborne, and stand up as quickly as possible so I can iPounce without losing height to my head being so low. Funnily enough, the real-time recording of this TAS was only a few ticks away from getting desynced by a batfly going through that pipe. Not sure how they escaped my destroy all bats command. I couldn't find a way to cancel momentum at the top of this pull ladder like I did with the other two. Instead, I just space my wall pounces out a lot more and use a fast ledge pull-up, which ends up being just about as good. Getting around this box with a slide wall pounce arc is actually shockingly easy to do manually. Unfortunately, it was also shockingly hard to optimize since there's so many possible things to adjust. And you guessed it, this 14JS setup is also completely different. I suppose when movement is physics-driven, getting to reuse inputs is pretty unlikely. While FPC is the fastest way to climb a freestanding pole, wall pouncing on and off of the pole is much faster when there's a wall available. As seen here, it's possible to do an FPC whilst upside down, which looks pretty funny. For the most part, it behaves identically, but it does cause some problems for me here. Jumping off of the pole like this stands Rivulet up, pulling his head away from the wall, which actually counts against wall pounce speed requirements. I intentionally bump my backflip against the wall here to cancel the flip animation, which lets me stay upright for a perfect tunnel entry. And that's pretty much the last movement of note in the TAS. For these last couple rooms, I'll give some background to the TAS itself. All said and done, this took somewhere between 100 and 125 hours to make, over the span of a month. I chose to TAS Exterior for its linearity, and Rivulet because this movement is not only the fastest, but also very interesting to work with and watch. Only a few characters can make it through UWDO5 anyway. I actually started working on this before Unknownagon's Rivulet with item wall TAS was published. The overlap is just coincidence. I was originally going to do this in Rivulet's timeline, but two rooms in particular appear to be completely impossible without CTF, items, or desyncs. AO6 and especially CO2 for those curious. Thankfully, AO6 was the first room that would have affected routing, so no work was lost switching to Survivor's timeline. I decided against using CTF because it trivializes most vertical rooms and is just a lot less interesting overall. Doesn't feel nice to have the solution to every vertical room be basically the same. Also, Rivulet's fast CTF and CTCF setups either don't work or send him sideways, which would be obnoxious to work around. I decided against using items because I didn't want to rely on setups that you might not have items for in an actual run. Metering items is also a bit of a weird problem, since throw boosting is basically always faster, and Tamacra lets you summon items so quickly that you can actually gain height by spamming up throw. I probably could have gone with something like gaining a rock per room, but overall I prefer the simplicity and objectiveness of Itemless as a rule, even if it locked me out of a couple major skips. And that's the TAS. Shoutouts to everyone on the Rain Meadow Discord who gave moral support, and to my fellow movement nerds there for helping me figure out a variety of problems and oddities I ran into during this. Anti-shoutouts to Windows for forgetting what an application focus is, making my constant tabbing in and out of the game nightmarish. And finally, shoutouts to anyone who bore with my, shall we say, inexperienced commentary in video editing. That is all. Thank you for your time and interest.